In movies and comics, there's that socially awkward, slightly mad inventor who's obsessed with science and discovery. That's my dad to a T. Today, I'll share the story of how he tried his hand at business in post-Soviet Russia. Spoiler alert, it didn't exactly go as planned. My dad was born in the wrong era and country. If he'd grown up in America, he might have been the next Nikola Tesla. Instead, he lived in the Soviet Union, where inventors were only appreciated in movies and magazines. The Soviet planned economy was not built to reward innovation. New ideas annoyed factory bosses. They brought risks, paperwork, and uncomfortable conversations with Communist Party committees. Nobody wanted that. But my dad kept inventing anyway. Every time he submitted a proposal, his bosses demanded to be listed as co-authors. Without their names, his ideas would not move forward. That's how he ended up with a stack of patents that weren't truly his. When Perestroika started, my dad thought it was the dawn of a new era. He believed the unjust, corrupt socialist system would collapse and finally, capable people like him would have their moment to shine. After receiving a hefty bonus for one of his inventions, my dad didn't buy a car or an apartment. He bought a computer. A clunky machine with a black and white monitor and a whopping 450 megabytes of memory. This is the future, he told my mom. He dreamed of starting his own company and being his own boss. Soon, he came home with a binder full of documents and a shiny new company stamp for his business, boldly named Middle Phase. But there was a catch. My dad had zero experience in commerce. He'd spent his entire life in manufacturing, had no trade connections, and could not Google it because the internet didn't exist yet. So he teamed up with Koля, a fellow engineer from the car factory. Their first business idea? Earrings, made from rings cut out of defective plastic tubes. If this sounds absurd, remember, in the late 1980s, Soviet women wore anything as jewelry. Glass pieces, feathers, even small industrial parts. Armed with soldering irons, my dad and Kola cranked out a batch of bijoux and crafted a display using an old velvet curtain and embroidery hoops. They sent their creations to kiosks near the train station. Unfortunately, no one was impressed. Not giving up, my dad jumped on the food craze. He traveled to Moscow, bought a crate of Snickers bars, and tried reselling them in those same kiosks. The vendors loved, explaining he'd bought them at retail prices instead of wholesale. The family decided to keep the Snickers for holiday gifts, but my sister and I secretly ate them all long before winter. With their ventures failing, my dad and Kola started taking odd jobs, fixing roofs, repairing appliances, and even cleaning out vegetable storage facilities. I earned my first paycheck helping them clean one of those storage sites. My dad promised me and my friends cash to shovel out rotten onions. At first, we were indignant. Local goddesses like us doing janitorial work? But we desperately wanted some new jeans, so we grabbed shovels and got to work. My dad was stuck. This wasn't the entrepreneurial dream he imagined when he left the factory. Meanwhile, my mom stayed at her old job, where at least they paid salaries, albeit months late. To make matters worse, Kola began drinking heavily, like many men of that era who treated their depression with vodka. My dad was lucky. He couldn't become an alcoholic because he'd fall asleep right after the first shot. I'm not exaggerating. Whenever we had a family gathering at my grandma's, she'd prepare a pillow and blanket for him in the next room. After the first round of food and drinks, Dad would head there and sleep it off. Eventually, my dad discovered that his computer wasn't just a glorified typewriter. It could calculate financial balances. Teaching himself accounting, he landed himself a job as a financial director at the vegetable storage facility. That position paid for my sisters and my university education. But my dad's restless spirit wasn't satisfied. He wanted to understand why his dream of a better post-Soviet world had not materialized. Turning into philosophy, he wrote a dissertation and earned a PhD. And then the mob showed up at the storage facility, demanding their share. That was the final straw. My dad quit and declared he'd become a night watchman so he could focus on writing his magnum opus. My dad's book was finished, but reading it was another story. His writing was so dense it made ancient Sumerian cuneiform look accessible. Naturally, every publisher in Moscow and St. Petersburg rejected it. I offered to help. By then, I was teaching creative writing and knew how to make complex ideas engaging and readable, but my dad just scoffed. Eggs don't teach chickens. The future generations will appreciate my work. I told my son, brace yourself, you're the future generation. So far, he avoids reading my dad's work on the grounds that he is not that good at reading Russian. It turned out my dad's true happiness wasn't in philosophy or patents. It was in building things. In the early 1990s, he bought a garden plot and single-handedly constructed a 2-story house. No contractors, no heavy machinery, just his meticulous planning and raw determination. To this day, I can't fathom how he did it. Could you build a 2-story house, complete with a balcony and terrace? I certainly couldn't. But my dad did. And now he's the star of his gardening community. These days, he's working on homemade wings. My mom calls him Crazy Icarus and forbids him to fly, fearing he'll crash. But my dad doesn't care. His workshop is cluttered with prototypes and tools, and he's as happy as ever. Who knows, maybe one day he really will take to the skies. It's easy to understand my dad. He belongs to the keeper-ruler personality subtype. People like him know they are capable of great things and never doubt themselves. What they do doubt is the world's ability to accept them for who they are. A ruler's life mission is to create their own kingdom and rule it completely on their terms. Rulers aren't great managers unless they deliberately train for it, but they are incredibly creative, persistent, and focused. You can read more about rulers on my website, link in the description. Subscribe.